this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And as we get into today's show with Amy Pooler, I just wanted to take a moment and just recognize her background as well. So my guest today is Amy Pooler. She's a senior vice president of research and development at Life Edit Therapeutics. She has over 20 years of scientific leadership experience in genetic medicine, neuroscience, and drug development. I'm really excited to have you, Amy. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks so much, Don. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So as we get started, would you mind just taking a moment and just telling everybody, what is it that led you to life sciences? I tell people all the time, I feel like there are a lot of different paths people can choose. And it's always interesting to hear, what led people here.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have to say, there's a great pitch for teachers and that early exposure to science. For me, it started when I was in high school even. I had a teacher that did a master's in neuroscience, and she would come to class and talk about it in our science class. And it made me really excited, like, well, the brain seems like a fascinating thing to study. Later, when I went to college, I actually decided to do astronomy. And I did that for a couple of years. And I loved the idea of exploring the universe and all the things that we don't know about it. And then I had this probably very college moment where I thought about exploring the universe within instead of the universe out there. And that's when I knew I had to go back to working on the brain. And I have been doing that ever since.
Well, it's interesting because so do you still do anything with astronomy?
Unfortunately, no, other than just like hobby things. I did get a chance to visit one of the big telescopes on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. And I remember thinking, okay, I could have lived here if I had gone into got into astronomy.
It gets really cold up there though. So yeah,
True.
understand. I think I read that I didn't get to see it this week, but I think the fourth and fifth Halley's Comet was back. That's why I was asking, because it was kind of a big moment, I would imagine, for
Cool.
people that are astronomy fans. So yeah.
Love that.
So how did your early experiences, whether it was at the University of Oxford and Mass General Hospital, how did they shape your career and leadership experience?
Yeah, I had the wonderful opportunity also to work at MIT, which is where I did my PhD, and a really fantastic PhD supervisor who supervised dozens and dozens of students. He gave me some great advice about encouraging me to be rigorous in my science. Things like do everything you can to prove yourself wrong before you think that you start to be right. And that experiments needed to work not just on Tuesdays, but also on Thursdays and Fridays. And, that kind of rigor is something that I've tried to carry with me throughout my scientific career. After I finished at MIT, I did go on to do a postdoc at the University of Oxford, as you mentioned. And what a great experience being able to work with scientists from all over the world. I love that the universality of the scientific research, the fact that people have different trainings from all different countries, and then we all get together at the bench to uncover really cool science. Uh, it was just such a fantastic experience. As you mentioned, also Mass General was wonderful. I still keep in touch with many of the scientists that I've met there, and hopefully we'll see a few of them next week at ASGCT when I'm there to discuss genomic medicines.
Very good. And it's interesting to me as well. So, I mean, you mentioned, just your time at MIT. Do you ever find yourself repeating any of the things that your professors said to you, like, things need to work, every day of the week?
All the time. If any scientists are listening that have worked with me, you have heard me say those things. It's going to work on even a Friday.
Even before it heads into the weekend, it's not always easy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So you've held different leadership roles, including, is it Sangamo Therapeutics?
Yes.
What were some of the key challenges and successes that you've encountered in these positions?
Yeah, I had such a wonderful time at Sangamo, and it's interesting, we were just talking about Mass General. Was actually my first exposure to genomic medicine. I don't wanna say how many decades ago, but, a reasonable time ago. It was when Sangamo was approaching Mass General for a collaboration on tau for Alzheimer's disease using something called a zinc finger epigenetic editor, where you could target the DNA and regulate the expression of this gene at the genomic level. And I remember learning about this and thinking, "Wow, this is just totally different than the small molecules I've been working on so far." And all of us were really excited about, wow, you can regulate the expression and edit any gene. So really thinking about all of those possibilities. I was very, very lucky that I had the chance to work at Sangamo then. Again, many, many years later, I spent some time first in Switzerland at Nestle, working as part of their global brain health platform before I went to California to work with Sangamo. Now, what was interesting with Sangamo is that I joined in 2019, and it was just before the start of the COVID pandemic. And probably one of the biggest challenges there was how to manage a team that works in the lab when everyone works from home. And in fact, we had signed a really fantastic agreement with Biogen for 12 neurological disease targets. And that happened, I want to say, 2 weeks before we all went home,
Mm.
and needing to hire and manage those programs with a rota in the lab so that folks could be safe. I had to be at home because people didn't want the manager cooties on site, which, I understand because it was such a crazy time. We didn't know what was going on or where it was going to go. And I never thought I would be home for so long at that time. So that was one of the major early challenges there.
Yeah, I find it interesting as well that for people that have only worked in the office, that switch to remote primarily is a big one. And then whenever you have, to your point, right, we have people, some people in the lab have to keep cell cultures alive. Some people, in the lab have to essentially do things within a certain time after you started to test, and then yeah, I remember, having all of these questions come up early on. The two things that stand out in my mind, one was we had a client who essentially had said, look, they were developing a diagnostic test using next generation sequencing, and they had said, look, we don't want any COVID positive samples in the population, and we didn't have a COVID test yet. And we were like, "Okay, well, we don't know how to test for this thing yet. Love to help you, but can't it's not an answer that we can provide yet. It's not clear." And so, one of our key questions was, could we actually figure that part out? I mean, obviously, there were other people working on it as well. It was more brilliant. But then the second thing was whenever they started talking about the whole shutdown, I remember thinking, "There's no way. There's no way that you're gonna get all these people to work from home." And lo and behold, we were all like, "Hey, look, if you're caught on the highway, you better have, a good reason why you're going into whatever office." So,
Yes, yeah, it was crazy days in that early time, and I think if you had asked me 10 years ago, "Could you work from home?" I would have been like, "No way, that's it's too hard to work from home, I couldn't focus." But then you just do it, right? And you get through it. I think one of the key learnings for me after COVID is that although I can work from home, I would prefer not to. And you see
mhm.
me in the office today, I wanna be close to the science, and I think when you're that's kind of leading into some of the leadership pieces, but you need to see what folks are experiencing and be there, and there may be even silly things. I remember we had an issue with there's some lab work being done, and there was, bottles it was hard for people to bring their water in, so the scientists were really thirsty, and all we had to do was put a cooler with some water bottles just outside the lab so that folks could have that. But because the water filter thing was being repaired, these kinds of small things, if you're not there to see it happening, you also don't necessarily get to hear about it, and I think living that experience together is really an important part of leadership.
Yeah, so important, as well. So you talked about, some of your different roles with different companies. What, prompted you to join Life Edit Therapeutics?
Yeah, I was excited to join an earlier stage company to be part of that building process about building kind of scalability and bringing new value to the company. I think Life Edit started probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's actually the R&D business of a bigger company called Elevate Bio that's headquartered in Waltham, Massachusetts. Elevate Bio has two business units. One is Basecamp, focused on cell therapy manufacturing, and then the Life Edit R&D genomic medicine piece. So another thing that I was excited about was actually bringing those two pieces together, and that's one of the things that I'm working heavily on right now. How can we leverage these great CRISPR-based genomic medicine tools for cell therapy applications and be able to carry that all the way through to the clinic and eventually to commercialization? I think what's interesting for me is that I see there are some key challenges with genomic medicine, and actually manufacturing is one of the big ones. I think for companies maybe at an earlier stage don't often have the understanding or the realization maybe that there's so many challenges with this. You're creating this live product, and batch to batch variability is huge. Making enough of it is huge. You may think about creating genomic medicines for something like Alzheimer's disease. You might need oceans of AAV to get there, which I think is possible, but you need to start thinking about that scaling up very early. And I really appreciate that Elevate Bio is thinking about those two things already, which I think once we start being able to do this process of working together, we'll be able to leverage to great effect. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I remember different inflection points in life sciences as well. One of the ones that really stands out to me was monoclonal antibodies, and just the fact that we talked for, I felt like, decades about monoclonal antibodies and the impact that they were going to have, and there's all this work that was going on, and then eventually we get to a point where yes, there are more and more things coming out that are monoclonal antibodies, but I feel the same right now with regards to like CRISPR technologies, and the impact that it could have, right? And I think we all kind of see that, and we definitely, have our fingers crossed as well.
It takes a long time to make drugs, and as you say, monoclonal antibodies is a great example, and for these CRISPR-based therapeutics, other genomic medicines, it's just really early days. Clinical trials still take a long time. The regulatory path takes a long time. Manufacturing is hard. There's so many things that still need to be worked out. But I think what's really exciting is just what the possibility that it could bring for patients.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in some cases, I feel like there are so many limitations, so many limitations as well that you know, um, CRISPR could answer, right? I mean that, all of a sudden we could have an answer for something that, we um you just were not as easily able to answer otherwise, right? It's sort of it will be an enabler for crossing a hurdle that we couldn't have crossed otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your role as a senior vice president of research and development at Life Edit Therapeutics. So what does a typical day look like for you?
I was laughing at initially seeing this, probably meetings, right? But actually, it highlights a really important part of my job, which is creating buy-in and discussing with the team all across the company, including even external collaborators. So it's things like scientific updates, the thinking about our business development and talking to potential partners as well as current partners. And Life Edit has two really wonderful collaborations, one with Moderna and one with Novo Nordisk, and I can talk a little bit more about that as well. And making sure that, as we mentioned earlier, that the Life Edit team here, that folks are getting the resources that they need and that there's nothing blocking them, that things are able to move forward. I see myself as I don't want to say enabler because it's not really the right word, but making sure everything is always moving forward. That creating buy-in piece is probably also one of the biggest things that folks don't talk about earlier stage in the career, but as you get to go through your career, that becomes a bigger and bigger piece. I think all the time about my husband says, "I'll do anything you want as long as I also want to do it." And I was like, "Oh, great, great." But then, wait a second. And that's exactly right, though. It's true for husbands, it's true for employees. If folks want to do that and want to be part of it, then it's very easy to get things done.
Yeah, I was just talking to the team yesterday about change management and kind of the levels of change management because a lot of people think about change management as being communications and what are we doing around communications, but the reality is there's a whole other level of stakeholder buy-in that you have to kind of consider along the way because we all have our reasons why we either do or don't do something and if there's a good reason for me to not do it, and we're working hard on putting something in place that kind of guarantees my buy-in, then you better be thinking about it early. So, I think it's something that all leaders, kind of learn in their career that hey, look, you better be considering this early as well.
Absolutely. Honestly, I cannot agree enough. And I think probably Amy of, many decades ago would have said, just get it done. Let's move forward quickly. Because I do have a passion for efficiency, which a friend once told me I should never say on a first date. But okay, it's true. So maybe I should say it and get it out there quickly. But I have a real passion for efficiency. But as I've grown in my career, I realized that the more efficient thing to do is to create the buy in early, because if you get to the point that's later in the project or the program and you haven't created that and you have to go back and remanage all the stakeholders again, it's not going to be an efficient way to move forward. And that's something that I say quite a lot, especially to more junior leaders. Take the time to understand what motivates people. Maybe this is also because I'm a neuroscientist, but I think a lot about why we make the decisions that we make
Mhm.
and what is motivating those decisions. And sometimes there are just natural friction points within teams, and that makes sense. Probably earlier this week, I was actually talking about someone was telling me, "Oh, this IP lawyer is too strict," and I was saying, "Well, that is his role to play, and that's the right role for him." Imagine if your IP lawyer was saying, "Yeah, go do whatever you want." That's just not the role that they're playing. And the role that you're going to play as an excited scientist is to say, I want to tell the world about my cool results. Okay,
Mm.
so that's where the friction is going to come in. But when you think about it more about what's motivating you, what roles you're playing, it helps not just managing sometimes these kind of conflicts, but also for really moving everything forward as you move through that process. So this is definitely a topic that I could talk for a while about.
Yeah, it's I mean, it it is an important thing to highlight as well, right? So I mean, you talked about sort of transitioning from, larger companies to smaller companies. And one of the important things that sort of happens, through the journey of any company is that you do start to see the importance of, roles being critical, especially in the way that they consider things. How do you balance that, with also trying to be innovative, as well? Because I mean, you guys are working more or less on the cutting edge of things, and so there is the balance of, push and pull to try and, yes, we do have to have some controls in place, but also, continue to remain innovative as well.
Yeah, I love that because it's the it's the perpetual challenge where you do need some processes and decision points and meetings, God forbid, in place in order to move these things forward. But you can't crush the innovation either. And I think a lot of that innovation work, it's important to happen on the early side of the science. And I often say to scientists, these skunk work projects, as you call them, that's often like where some of the really great breakthroughs happen. You cannot kill that. And even part of the job of scientists in industry is not just to put the head down and get that one project done, but to always be thinking about what else could be done on the sides. And if that means that there's a little tiny experiments happening here and there, I think that that's probably a good thing. And those are the things that lead to really cool projects later on down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked a little bit about your collaborations with Moderna and Novo Nordisk. Can you tell us a little bit more about the partnerships and their significance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the drug development path for genomic medicine, as I mentioned before, is long. And for a smaller early phase company, it's hard to run that whole gamut, I guess, of commercialization. And that's where these kinds of business partnerships come in really handy. And you see many of them across the life sciences field, right? What the Life Edit side is bringing is that early stage technology, the proprietary CRISPR platform. and the protein engineering expertise and all of these things that make a great toolbox for building the building blocks of genomic medicines. But for these partnerships, especially for a company like Novo Nordisk, which is incredible, they have all of this fantastic clinical experience being able to run large clinical trials across the globe to commercialize, to launch and commercialize new drugs. That's where these collaborations, everyone is bringing the pieces that they are knowledgeable about. And it may be that right now Life Edit is not making drugs in their own hands and launching them, but it's something that I hope that we can do in the future. But being able to launch drugs through others is also incredibly powerful. Just getting them, getting these novel medicines into the bodies of patients is what really motivates me. So those collaborations have been great. And what I love is that in addition to all of the great science and the drug development part, for the scientists involved, it's also a way to understand how different companies work. And I
Mm.
see these scientists working together with their counterparts, which is really cool. You see how other companies make decisions, and it's just a learning experience for everyone involved.
Yeah. Well, also, um, the criticality I feel like for the sponsorship of some of the science in so many of our companies in life sciences is important. I talk all the time to different companies about the the void that I feel like is going to happen as well with some of the lack of funding, from the government, from NIH right now and things like that. I just have a feeling that we'll all sort of well beyond any sort of political cycles that we're in the United States. We're going to feel the impact of the things that are happening now, and along with that, though, is the commercial sponsorship as well. So it's just the companies that are out there making the drugs, looking at the available things that people are working on and continuing, to help carry that is also critical. I definitely see it as well, on my side.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we were talking before about some challenges, and I was talking about COVID, but now we're also in this time where there's a big economic downturn for biotech and pharma. It's challenging. I think some of that is probably the excitement and exuberance that happened in the early COVID days, and then now it turns out that it's still a long process to make drugs. So even if you have the flashiest, shiniest new technology, you still have to show the safety and efficacy, get through the regulatory pathway, find people that will pay for it, and all of those things that are probably even more challenging. And I think navigating this time where I see investors being very risk adverse, being part of a new technology, it's certainly challenging.
Yeah, for sure. So what are the primary goals and the mission of Life Edit Therapeutics, and how do you see the company impacting the field of genetic medicine?
We are looking to build the best-in-class genomic medicine toolbox that's CRISPR-based. I think the company has come a long way to doing that already, and part of that is because of the vast protein engineering experience that the company has. So they have a protein library that's proprietary of about 20 billion different CRISPR-based proteins, which is cool because it means that they can be engineered to do many different functionalities like cutting or base editing or reverse transcriptase editing, large targeted gene insertion. So that flexibility of the platform, but also the depth where they can be engineered to bind anywhere in the DNA in the genome. And I think that's where you really need that toolbox. Something that I probably would not have said even a few years ago is that you need that kind of breadth. But you do because the biology is still challenging. There are many things we don't know about what causes different diseases. And you may think that you know, and you want to go in there and edit this base or this base, but it may turn out that when you do that, it's actually not changing the course of the disease. So having a toolbox to go back to say, instead of just changing this base and this base, we're going to put a whole copy of a new gene into that locus. Maybe you need to do that in order to have the therapeutic benefit that you're looking for. I feel like that piece was potentially a little bit underestimated in the beginning, and it caused a lot of fractionation also in the genomic medicine field, that CRISPR companies were focused maybe on just one thing and getting really good at that. But thankfully, due to other factors like automation, which enables you to screen more and more and more proteins and get that data, feed it back into your models to predict what the next better things are. And things like AI and machine learning, we're using this to really benefit from the protein large models, so like the large language models, but instead to build novel proteins. That's something that could not have been predicted even 10 years ago, that they would be able to make that kind of application. I think about a lot of, again, as a neuroscientist, about what are the constraints of our own brain when it comes to doing this kind of work. And it's clear that something like AI, which is not constrained by your own brain, is able to identify new proteins with new functionalities that could be applied to all kinds of diseases. So that's where I think for Life Edit, building that toolbox and having it be all under one roof is important.
Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting to me to see the evolution of AI as well, throughout time, because I feel like, we started with, models that were very frustrating to work with, to to put it lightly, and then, sort of things have progressed to a point where they're much more advanced and they have, definite abilities. Do you ever, also are you ever concerned about the answers that come back from AI as well? I mean, I would imagine from a scientific perspective, you're still having to go back and validate everything that's been said, as well, and it has to be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why having the lab-based work paired with the AI is so important. You need to be able to have that constant feedback loop for the sanity checking, but to make the models better and better and better. If we don't have
Mhm.
that, then we wouldn't be able to use it, I think, effectively.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about, kind of the amount of meetings that have to happen, but I what that also relates to me is, just the transition that every leader has to make whenever you're somebody that has been in the lab and is doing these things to now you're somebody who's having to think strategically. How do you kind of, find that level of balance and ability to manage the kind of the strategic and tactical side.
I talk a lot about the analogy of being on the balcony or in the dance. I don't know if
Mm.
you've heard this
No,
one.
no, haven't heard.
So when you're more junior in your career, you're often in the dance. You're doing the research, you're in there with all the other people swirling around, right? Trying to get things done. But when you start to move into leadership roles, you need to bring yourself on the balcony sometimes. And it means that you're not dancing, you're watching, you're understanding, you're getting information from what's happening. And I think that transition is something that sometimes scientists find a little challenging because we're so used to the details. And I think about this too. I'm still a scientist, and I love details, and I get sucked into the data, and it's like so cool, so cool. But then you have to remember, wait a second, what is this for? Who is paying for it? Is
Mhm.
this the direction we want things to be going in? And that's a skill that I really encourage junior scientists to develop. It may be that you get to spend a little time in the dance still, and I do, and I absolutely love that. Whenever scientists will bring me some data, I just saw some yesterday, actually, some new editing data that I was like, "Yay! This is so cool." And is it one of our goals this year? I'm not totally sure, but that's the
Mhm.
piece that you still get excited about. And for junior folks, you need to find that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I find it a struggle sometimes too because there's a level of, look, I know I could just go do this thing and answer it myself pretty darn quick, but, the question is, but then does the person that's in the dance, do they learn what they need to learn out of this as well? So they also need to, kind of come along and understand how to do the thing just as efficiently, right? So that's the other half for me, that is, sometimes frustrating as a leader. It's like, look, I think I could do this in, a minute or two, and we're talking like weeks to get the answer, and I'm just not understanding why does it take so long, to sometimes come up with this solution.
It's the efficiency aspect, right? But there's so much about leadership that's mentorship, and I had a
Yeah.
really wonderful leadership course when I was working at Nestle in Switzerland about that was talked about just the way to be a good leader. And I think in the past I had thought a lot. I'd taken courses that were like, "What type of leader are you?" But that's not necessarily the right way to go, because I like that they're like, there is a good type of leader, and it's leaders that are mentoring, that are authentic, that are mission driven and having this kind of vision. So I'm always on a path of continuous improvement, looking to be a better leader, better scientist, all of the parts of my life. And I feel like I really encourage everyone to be like that too.
So that leads me to my next question, which is what is the greatest piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a great question. I think this training course that helped me to say it's not about you and what style you want to be, but it's about getting to this endpoint that is universally beneficial. I think the authenticity piece, being calm, controlling your emotions, leading from the front and being courageous, those are things I think about really honestly every day, and we bring our whole selves to work. And if you expect other people to bring themselves to work, you should also be bringing your whole self to work too. I it's funny, I often say that work should be fun, and it should be fun, right? It's work, but we also spend more time with our work colleagues than we do sometimes even with our own families, and, it is what it is, and we want to be passionate and care about the work that we're doing, and it should be fun as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, what inspires you?
I think so from a scientific perspective, the tenacity of scientists. I always say things like, maybe only 1 in 10 experiments actually work. You gotta keep going back and doing it again and again. If it could even be 2 in 10, you would double your productivity. But that creativity and the tenacity of scientists that I see here at Life Edit and I've seen earlier in my career is just so inspirational. I love it.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I remember going through with my the person that was over my doctoral studies and just spent a lot of time, talking about kind of the level and depth that we would have to get in terms of certain answers with regards to my dissertation and things like that. And I was just like, I don't think I carried the idea of just the level that we'd have to get to in terms of answering, particular things as well. And so I mean, I agree with you. I think it's to stay in that and to continue to sort of, have the tenacity to keep coming back and keep trying to dig for answers is something that, is rewarding to see as well. So Amy, what concerns you?
I think there's a need for innovation in areas beyond science, though, and maybe it's some of that tenacity and creativity could be extended to other parts of the drug development pathway. I know there's many changes right now at the FDA that are happening, but that regulatory challenge, how do we bring safe treatments to patients, but also make sure that no one is waiting for treatments that could be really beneficial for them, right? It's a balance, and genomic medicine is just a new cog in that's a new unknown. How does that work, and how do we make sure that drugs are safe and effective? There's also challenges now about commercialization. How do you pay for a one and done treatment? If you have it's kind of conflicting, let's say, value drivers here, where some companies would prefer to have revenue over time, but patients, if it could be a one and done treatment, that would be massively beneficial. And I know there's been some innovation there, like outcomes based payments and that kind of thing. So I really look forward to more innovation in this space, even outside of scientific.
Yeah. Last question, what excites you?
So I think the real innovation we're seeing now, I'm just so excited to be living in this time where we can be at the forefront of this. I was listening to my 8-year-old telling his friends that his mama makes makes new medicines for sick people, and I was like, that's right. And I hope that in 40 years, 50 years, we look back and we're in this position like with monoclonal antibodies, where we're just at the beginning. And I know it's a huge cliche to say that we're building the plane while we're flying it, but it's like so true. And it's also really liberating too. It means that we have so much opportunity to try to figure out how to do things right. And maybe not everything is going to work the first time. And you try this and you try this. And we start with the AAV. Maybe in the future we're going to move into other delivery methods that are less challenging for patients. But there's so many areas to innovate that it just opens up a whole new world. So I'm excited for what the future will bring.
Oh, very good. Well, Amy, thank you for being on the Life Science Success podcast. I'm going to take away so much from our conversation, both being in the balcony to being in the dance, as well as just the overall update in terms of where you are with CRISPR medicine. So thanks a lot for being here and for telling me about what you're doing at Life Edit Therapeutics.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.